Chapter 1296. Qin Anlan looked at him again and didn't say anything. He boarded the private plane. In the cafe, Yi Liangqiu held the cup of hot coffee and sipped it lightly. However, her body was still cold, because the cup of hot coffee couldn't warm her body up. "Are you feeling better?" Lin Xingyuan's voice was gentle. He reached out to hold her hand and said, "If you're feeling better, go home. Mu Yun is still waiting for you." Yi Liangqiu looked up at him and said in a low voice, "Lin Xingyuan, I don't want to have another child." He looked at her for a long time before he picked up his cup of coffee. "Are you sure?" "Yes." She smiled lightly. "Xingyuan, I'm a mortal after all. I can't do it." Lin Xingyuan didn't ask too much. He just smiled and said, "It's good that you've thought it through. It's just that Mu Yun will have to work a little harder." Yi Liangqiu looked down and said, "I'll be with him." Lin Xingyuan finished a cup of coffee and picked up the car key. "Let's go. I'll take you home." She looked up and looked into his eyes. She said softly, "He's married." "I know." He still smiled gently, held her hand, and walked out. It was late at night, and the dew was cold. This time, she didn't break away from his hand. She just let him hold her hand. At this moment, what he gave her was not comfort, but peace. Lin Xingyuan sent her home, but he didn't stay. Instead, he drove back. Yi Liangqiu stood by the car. "Xingyuan, you, call me when you get home." He sat in the car and looked at her with burning eyes. "Yi Liangqiu, are you willing to try with me?" He put his slender and good-looking fingers on the steering wheel and smiled gently at her. "Yi Liangqiu, I'm just a doctor with an annual salary of 500,000. Are you sure?" He wasn't just talking about money, he was also talking about fame and status. Lin Xingyuan was born into a family of doctors. Adding on his ancestral property, it was enough for her to have 5 children, all of whom could be fed until they were fat and plump. But fame and status, he could not give her. She was the most dazzling star in the film industry. He couldn't give her that kind of status. So, he still had to ask her again, because he didn't want her to regret it. They were no longer impulsive children. Yi Liangqiu put her hands behind her back. She shook her head and then nodded at him. She acted like a 10-year-old girl who didn't know what to do or was frightened. Actually, she had never been in love before. Lin Xingyuan sighed. "Liangqiu, tell me, are you willing? I don't lack money. And I think the days of being frozen are pretty good," she said briskly. Lin Xingyuan smiled. She understood him and what he meant. He didn't say too much and didn't ask her further. He just said goodbye and drove out of her villa. Lin Xingyuan felt that he was taking advantage of her, but he thought that if he didn't do this, he would regret it in the future. Yi Liangqiu looked at him in the moonlight for a while, then entered the main hall and slowly went upstairs. There were only 2 or 3 servants in this villa, and they were all used to it. Late at night, she walked into the children's room on the 2nd floor. Mu Yun was awake. The little boy sat on the bed and watched his mother come in. He asked softly, "Mom, are you going to be with Uncle Lin?" Chapter 1297. Yi Mu Yun's little face was a little tense. After sitting for a while, he said, "I saw Dad." Yi Liangqiu was a little confused. She had never told Mu Yun about Qin Anlan. How could Mu Yun recognize him? Yi Mu Yun's voice was very soft. "I saw him at the airport." He looked at Mom, and Mom looked at him. Yi Liangqiu didn't know how to explain to her son. After a long silence, she said, "But Mom can't take Mu Yun to see him for the time being." Little Mu Yun nodded obediently. "I like Uncle Lin too. However, it would be better if that person was his father." Adults could often guess what a child didn't say. Yi Liangqiu didn't want to say too many cruel words to him. She reached out and touched his head. "Okay, go to sleep." Xiao Muyun responded with an "oh" and lay down obediently. Yi Liangqiu didn't go anywhere. She directly lay down beside the little body. She half held her son. She had never said that she also had insomnia. She could only fall asleep when she held Mu Yun. Insomnia could be contagious. Why not love? Little Mu Yun was already in a daze. He asked softly, "Mom, do you like Uncle Lin? Does Mu Yun like him?" Yes. Then Mom likes him. Little Moo Yoon wanted to ask more, but he was a child after all. He always fell asleep easily. As soon as he finished speaking, he didn't say anything. Yi Liangqiu covered him with the quilt and lay down beside him. Moo Yoon, I'm sorry. I can't give Dad to you. He has someone else. He's married. Yi Liangqiu didn't sleep that night, and she was a little dizzy the next day. Fortunately, Aunt Zhong took care of Moo Yoon for a day, and Moo Yoon listened to her. In the evening, Aunt Zhong took little Moo Yoon to a nearby square to play. This was a high-end villa area, so the security was very good. Yi Liangqiu did not have to worry. Little Moo Yoon was 6 years old. He hadn't gone to school yet, but he liked to play with small balls recently. He bounced the ball not for fun, but because he liked to count while bouncing. When he counted to 1,000, the middle-aged lady sitting beside him laughed. What a smart child. Aunt Zhong quickly smiled. Sitting there was old Madam Qin, the previous head of King Entertainment. She looked at the pretty little boy and then at Auntie Zhong. Your grandson? Aunt Zhong wasn't too guarded. She blurted out, it's not mine. It's my employer's child. Lady Qin looked at the little fellow again and asked casually, what's your employer's name? There were more than 10 families living here, and Mrs. Qin knew most of the people who could afford to buy a house. Aunt Zhong thought for a moment and said, Miss Yi. Miss Yi. Mrs. Qin thought for a moment. Is it Yi Liangqiu? Aunt Zhong said yes. She didn't know that the person sitting there was little Moo Yoon's biological grandmother. Otherwise, she wouldn't have told her. The more Mrs. Qin looked at the child, the more she felt he looked like a person. Her face slowly turned livid. She liked the child, but she wasn't satisfied with the child's mother. He had a bad background, a crazy mother, and a broken family. She didn't feel comfortable hearing about it. Mrs. Qin didn't show it. Instead, she smiled. Of course Miss Yi's child is different. Aunt Zhong felt that there was something wrong with the old lady. She seemed to know Miss Yi. So she asked tentatively, do you know Miss Yi? Mrs. Qin said, she's quite famous. My daughter likes her movies. I didn't expect them to live together. What's more, she gave birth to Anlan's child. Chapter 1298. Lady Qin looked at Moo Yoon and waved at him. Kid, come here and let me have a look. Moo Yoon looked at Aunt Zhong. Aunt Zhong was not on guard. She smiled and said, go and have a look at that grandma. Aunt Zhong did not think much of it. She just felt that the old lady in front of her and Moo Yoon were fated. Moo Yoon hesitated for a moment, but he still went and stood in front of Lady Qin. Lady Qin reached out and touched his little head. She said gently, why haven't you gone to school yet? Moo Yoon looked up and did not tell the truth. He just said, I didn't go to school today. Lady Qin did not think much of it. She just smiled gently. When her hand left, Moo Yoon's scalp hurt. He looked at the old lady in front of him, who was still smiling kindly. Tears flashed in his eyes. He looks so good. Lady Qin looked at him. He looked like Anlan when he was a child. Although they were not exactly the same, there was at least an 80% resemblance. That was why she dared to make such a conclusion. Grandma will give you a gift next time. Lady Qin touched his little bag again. Moo Yoon looked at her and said suddenly, my favorite is milk buns. Lady Qin was a little surprised. The little person in front of her looked a little cold and did not like to talk, but he was not shy at all. Lady Qin's eyes were even more loving at this thought. After returning home, Aunt Zhong told Yi Liangqiu about it. She said that she saw an old lady in the small square who liked Moo Yoon. She thought that Miss Yi would feel better if she said that. But after Aunt Zhong said it, Yi Liangqiu's eyes changed. She looked at Aunt Zhong. Qin? Aunt Zhong nodded. Yes, Qin. Yi Liangqiu pursed her lips. Don't take Moo Yoon out these days. Oh, Aunt Zhong said, but she did not take it seriously. It was an old lady who looked very noble and treated Moo Yoon very well. Yi Liangqiu felt uneasy for several days. She guessed that it was Qin Anlan's mother, but if she took the initiative to ask, it would show that she was guilty. A week later, he finally received a call from an unknown number. Miss Yi, Our madam wants to see you. The voice on the phone was very cautious. Yi Liangqiu held the phone and said indifferently, I don't know your madam. I got the wrong person. Let me talk to her. A slightly stern voice came from the other side. It was a little old, but it was full of vigor. Yi Liangqiu was silent for a while. Okay, where is it? Yi Liangqiu said. Yi Liangqiu said calmly. Yi Liangqiu nodded. 4 o'clock, is that okay? After that, she put down the phone and said to Aunt Zhong, take care of Muyun at home. I'll go out for a while. Aunt Zhong said, don't worry, Miss Yi. I will. Yi Liangqiu then drove out. The white Bentley drove for about half an hour to the restaurant that Lady Qin had mentioned. It was an English-style tea house, which was the favorite place for old ladies to spend time. There were many quaint private rooms, which were very suitable for talking about private matters. Yi Liangqiu was wearing black trousers and a simple white shirt. She walked straight in with the waiter. The waiter opened the wooden door. There was only a middle-aged lady in the English-style private room. She looked kind, but there was a touch of dignity in her eyes. Chapter 1299. She said lightly to the waiter, you can leave now. I'll be fine here. The waiter recognized her and smiled. Miss Yi, I'll leave first. He bowed and left. Yi Liangqiu closed the door gently and walked forward slowly. She knelt in front of Lady Qin. There was a cup of black tea and 2 bone china cups in front of her. Yi Liangqiu looked at them. It seemed that there were only the 2 of them today. She thought that Qin Anlan probably didn't know about this at the moment. Yi Liangqiu poured a cup of black tea for Lady Qin and herself. She stirred it gently. Lady Qin, the temperature is just right. You can drink it now. Lady Qin looked at the girl in front of her. She was tall and thin. She was pretty. She didn't dress up too gorgeously when she came to see her. Just now, that waiter knew you. Why? Did you come here often? Why haven't I seen you before? Lady Qin said slowly. Yi Liangqiu smiled. After a while, she said, not really. Then she knew you because of your fame. She watched your movies. Lady Qin looked at Yi Liangqiu fiercely. Yi Liangqiu lowered her eyes and smiled slightly. Lady Qin wants to remind me that everything I have is given by King Entertainment, right? Lady Qin nodded and finally took a sip of tea. You're very smart. Yi Liangqiu smiled. But madam has forgotten. I'm a frozen female artist of King Entertainment, so I don't feel too grateful to King Entertainment. I can even say to myself and others that everything I have today was earned by myself. Lady Qin's expression wasn't gentle. She sneered. Sharp-tongued. Yi Liangqiu smiled faintly. Madam is not looking for a daughter-in-law. As a frozen artist, I really don't have to ask for your approval, so I can say whatever I want. Are you always like this? You just want to live freely? Lady Qin's tone was much calmer. Yi Liangqiu smiled again. I want to, but it's not likely. She looked at Lady Qin. Just like I want to live freely now, but madam won't let me. Lady Qin nodded. I haven't told Anlan about this. As she spoke, she pushed a DNA report in front of Yi Liangqiu. You know what you're doing. Are you going to hand the child over to me, or wait for Anlan to come back and sue you? Do you want to give the child to me, or wait for Anlan to come back and sue you? Yi Liangqiu's eyes fell on the report. Lady Qin continued, I know that Anlan and the female artists in the company have some ambiguous relationships. If you had started dating Anlan with your current status, I wouldn't have said anything. But the child is already so big. You just entered the company then. What kind of thoughts did you have when you were with Anlan? 500,000. Yi Liangqiu looked at Lady Qin and sneered. Madam should know everything about President Qin. Why are you asking me? Lady Qin came from a prestigious family. She had never heard such vulgar words before. She couldn't stand it anymore and her body trembled. But she had good self-control and quickly calmed down. She said sternly, do you think someone of Miss Yi's status can say something like that? Status? Yi Liangqiu smiled playfully. If madam had recognized my status, She wouldn't have met me in this way, right? Chapter 1300. Lady Chen's old eyes narrowed. Women who are too smart don't have a good ending. There's still a long way to go before I die. It's too early to talk about this, but madam, you can think about it. She didn't stand on ceremony with Lady Chen. At this moment, it wasn't a conversation between two women, but two mothers. They were both protecting their children like mother beasts. To Yi Liangqiu, Lady Chen's behavior was taking away her child. She had long passed the age of naivety. Lady Chen had talked to her about Mu Yun without informing Qin Anlan. Even if Mu Yun returned to the Chen family, he would only have one identity, an illegitimate child. She wouldn't let that happen. Lady Chen was indeed the big boss of King Entertainment. She didn't care about a little flower like Yi Liangqiu. She pursed her lips and said in an indifferent tone, "Miss Yi, everything can be clearly marked with money. For example, Miss Yi's first time is 500,000 yuan. How much are you selling my grandson, Mu Yun?" This was the deepest insult. Yi Liangqiu didn't get angry. Instead, she laughed. "Lady Chen, do you think I'll sell my child? You've even sold yourself, haven't you? To be honest, there's pleasure in selling one's body, but there's only pain in selling one's child." Yi Liangqiu smiled coldly. "So, I won't sell him." She was even more rude than before. Lady Chen was so angry that she almost fainted. She pointed at her and said, "You're shameless. You're a disgrace to us women. You're the shameless one." "Madam." Yi Liangqiu stood up slowly and looked down at her. "Madam, you've lived alone for so many years. Don't tell me you can't even distinguish between pleasure and pain." She didn't want to bother and was about to leave. But she was stopped by Lady Chen. "Wait." Yi Liangqiu looked up at her. "Anything else? Aren't you curious? Where is your child?" Lady Chen's voice was also slightly cold. Luckily, she had already made preparations. Crispy Sleeve had said that Yi Liangqiu was very difficult to deal with and was not like an ordinary woman. Luckily, she had already made preparations. Yi Liangqiu clenched her fists. "Where did you take Mu Yun?" "A safe place." There was a touch of contempt in Lady Chen's eyes. "Where he should be." Yi Liangqiu narrowed her eyes. "Give him back to me." Lady Chen was still sitting, dressed in luxurious clothes. "Name a price, and he will be a child of the Chen family from now on. Qin Anlan is married." Yi Liangqiu looked straight at Lady Chen. "With Pei Chichi. How is it? Isn't it exciting?" She walked forward step by step. "You asked Mu Yun to call Pei Chichi mom, right?" Lady Chen's eyes widened and she looked at Yi Liangqiu in disbelief. She pointed at her and said in a shrill voice, "No, this is impossible." "How could this be possible?" "Absolutely impossible. Anlan wouldn't be so silly. Whether it's true or not, you can ask him yourself." Yi Liangqiu's voice was even colder. "You will have your own grandson in the future, so return Mu Yun to me." Lady Chen was still murmuring, "This is absolutely impossible, absolutely impossible." After saying that, she fell to the ground with a thud. Lady Chen had a heart disease. In the chaos, Yi Liangqiu called 120, and Lady Chen was sent to the hospital for emergency treatment. Yi Liangqiu sat in the corridor of the hospital and waited. No matter what, she had made Lady Chen so angry. No matter how long it took, she had to wait outside. Chapter 1301. Put Mu Yun back. Yi Liangqiu leaned against the cold wall and murmured, "I'll compensate her if something happens to her." Her eyes reddened. "Old madam has never been bullied like this before. Ms. Yi, you have to respect yourself." "How can I respect myself?" Yi Liangqiu chuckled. "Did you ask for a penny from the Qin family after giving birth alone? You've already gotten enough from King Entertainment. You can't be too greedy." She had been with Lady Chen for a long time. Her tone was like that of an ancient family, suppressing others in every way. Yi Liangqiu sneered. "I earned that with my life and sweat, not by selling Mu Yun." She was speechless for a long time before saying, "Let's wait until old madam wakes up." Just then, A maid from the Qin family rushed over with a panicked expression. "Oh no, oh no." She looked at her and scolded, "Nonsense. Old madam is in the operating room now. Why are you yelling about this now?" "Yes. That child was hit and is bleeding non-stop." The maid's voice was trembling. "It's so scary." Yi Liangqiu grabbed her. "What did you say?" The maid was even more afraid and her voice was unsteady. "He's bleeding non-stop. It's so scary." "Where is he?" Yi Liangqiu's voice was shrill and hoarse. "Where?" "He was sent to the hospital." The maid swallowed hard. "He needs a blood transfusion, but he has Rh negative blood. The blood bank doesn't have it." "Would that child die?" "She was the one who pushed him. She didn't do it on purpose, she really didn't." Yi Liangqiu dialed Dr. Lin's number with trembling hands. "Xing Yuan, bring those two people over. They're at Sea City General Hospital. Hurry, Mu Yun is bleeding." "Got it. Don't panic, he'll be fine. I'll be right there." Lin Xingyuan was on duty last night and didn't change his clothes. He drove out in his home clothes and brought them over in less than 20 minutes. When Yi Liangqiu put down her phone, Su Xiu looked at her. Rh negative blood. It was the same for the young master. It wasn't strange, but why would Yi Liangqiu keep two Rh negative people on standby? There was something wrong with that child's body. Crisp Sleeve folded her hands and silently said, "Old lady, it's not worth it for a sick child." The child was sick and could not be kept. Two operating theaters, one on the east and the other on the west, two blood-related people were in the operating theater. Fortunately, they were all fine. When Qin Anlan came back, it was already late at night. He walked to Lady Qin's ward and looked at Lady Qin's pale face for a long time before he carefully placed her slightly cold hand under the quilt and asked in a deep voice, "Why did my mother suddenly collapse from anger? If not for timely treatment, he might have died." Qingxiu's heart thumped. Old madam forbade her from talking about the young master. Moreover, the child was obviously problematic. Whether or not old madam wanted him in the future was another matter. It wasn't the right time to talk about it. Hence, she thought for a moment and said, "Old madam met Miss Yi by chance. It turns out that they live in the same neighborhood, so they had tea together." Unexpectedly, Miss Yi told her about young master's marriage in New York and old madam collapsed. Qin Anlan narrowed his eyes. She said it. Only Yi Liangqiu knew about this, so he didn't doubt it at all. Chapter 1302. Qin Anlan let out a long sigh. "Got it." Qingxiu looked at him and sighed again. The old lady's health isn't good. Miss Yi really shouldn't have provoked her. After saying that, she also looked at Qin Anlan reproachfully. Qin Anlan naturally understood what she meant. After the old lady wakes up, young master, don't provoke her anymore. The old lady's life hasn't been easy, Qingxiu said, her eyes turning red. Qin Anlan sat there without saying a word. He reached out and touched Lady Qin's face. Qingxiu looked at him and didn't say anything. Young master still had deep feelings for the old lady. That made things easier. The doctor came over and checked the situation. He said in a low voice, "The old lady has been taking good care of herself these few years. If it was a few years ago, it would probably be over." Qin Anlan's eyes were a little red and he felt a little guilty. Dr. Zhao was also familiar with him and could be considered to have a personal relationship with the Qin family. He patted his shoulder. "There's always no problem. Be careful in the future and don't make the old lady angry again." Qin Anlan nodded. "I know. The surgery isn't serious. She can go back to rest after about a week." Dr. Zhao pursed his lips and smiled. "Don't worry, the old lady's body is very strong." Qin Anlan still had a lingering fear and forced a smile. He sent Dr. Zhao away and took the opportunity to smoke outside. He was a little annoyed. He leaned there with a cigarette in one hand and his phone in the other. He looked down for a long time and still called Yi Liangqiu. It was a man who answered. His voice was gentle and elegant. "Are you looking for Liangqiu?" Qin Anlan froze for a moment and immediately thought of the man he saw the other day. He said in a cold voice, "Where is she?" Lin Xingyuan paused for a moment and then said softly, She just went out. I'll tell her when she comes back. Qin Anlan narrowed his eyes and wanted to say something, but his gaze froze. Then, he put his hand down and stared at the woman in front of him. Yi Liangqiu. In the middle of the night, did you come here because of guilt? Qin Anlan's voice was very cold. Yi Liangqiu looked in that direction and said calmly, I just want to see how she is. It was almost gone. Are you satisfied now? Qin Anlan approached her step by step and grabbed her neck. Yi Liangqiu, do you hate me that much? I don't understand what President Qin is talking about. Yi Liangqiu looked calm. Don't understand? Qin Anlan roughly pulled her into his embrace, forcefully clasping her. With just one hand, he restrained her, preventing her from escaping. His pupils contracted rapidly. You can't possibly not know how much of a blow this is to her. Then why did you still do it? Yi Liangqiu said coldly, President Qin, if you do it, you have to bear the consequences. He looked at her beautiful face, stared at her eyes, and suddenly pushed her away. Yi Liangqiu hit straight against the opposite wall. Her shoulder blade was in pain, but she still smiled. Don't you want to ask why I told her? I don't want to know. His voice was cold. If my mother is fine, then forget it. If something happens to her, then, Yi Liangqiu, I will make you regret living in this world. Her body was close to the wall behind her, and she closed her eyes slightly. Qin Anlan, I understand. When she opened her eyes again, she smiled lightly. I don't regret it. She thought that a sick child couldn't enter the eyes of Lady Qin. After she woke up, she wouldn't tell Qin Anlan about the existence of Mu Yun. That was good. Chapter 1303. But when she looked at his eyes, she still felt a little hurt, she still felt a little disappointed. The person she used to like didn't trust her at all. His mother had fallen ill from anger, so he felt that she was doing it on purpose to take revenge on him. She should have given up. Qin Anlan wasn't the person who understood her. Yi Liangqiu's words made him even angrier. He walked over step by step and finally landed in front of her. She raised her hand and looked at him. Are you looking for me? Her voice was soft, but it was clear in the night. Was he going to hit her? He wanted to hit her. Tears gathered in her eyes, stubbornly refusing to fall. At that moment, Qin Anlan had an illusion that the images of Yi Liangqiu and Chichi overlapped. He thought he was looking at Pei Chichi, his thin lips moved, and his Adam's apple moved rapidly. But in the end, he put his hand down, stared at her eyes and said, Get lost. Yi Liangqiu's lips trembled, and she slowly straightened her body. Her back was aching, as if her bones were broken. She slowly straightened up, and without looking at him, she turned and walked towards the elevator. Lin Xingyuan stood at the entrance of the elevator. She didn't know how long he had been standing there. Perhaps, he had seen her from the beginning. She couldn't move her feet, so she could only look at him. At this moment, he was her savior. Lin Xingyuan walked over slowly, put her phone in her palm, and said slowly, I forgot my phone. She lowered her head and nodded. Her long hair covered her eyes, so Qin Anlan couldn't see a drop of hot tears falling on Lin Xingyuan's palm. He felt hot, but he wasn't surprised. It wasn't surprising that she would cry. Actually, she was only in her 20s, and she had been independent for so long, she was still a child. Perhaps it was because Lin Xingyuan had watched her grow up from a child to this, and he felt pity for her in his heart. Most of the time, when he looked at her, he still felt that she was the helpless girl from 5 or 6 years ago. Her forehead was full of sweat, and she told him that she wanted the child in her belly. At that time, she was already half the world famous. She knew exactly what this meant to her. Lin Xingyuan gently and firmly held her hand. Let's go. Mu Yun is waiting for you. Yi Liangqiu looked at his hand for a long time and finally put her hand in his. Lin Xingyuan clenched his fist. All right, let's go. Qin Anlan stood in place, watching as she was taken away by others. He took a long drag on his cigarette. Actually, he wanted to hit her just now, but in the end, he couldn't bring himself to do it. It wasn't because she was a woman, and it wasn't because he had some principle of not hitting women. It was all because she was Yi Liangqiu. It was all because she was the girl he hugged to sleep many years ago. He was sure that if it had been someone else, he probably wouldn't have let them off so easily. The elevator opposite opened, and she and the man entered. The elevator across from him closed, and he couldn't see her. Qin Anlan threw away the cigarette in his hand and stepped on it to extinguish it. He looked at her with a profound gaze, and the feeling of powerlessness welled up again. But again, he chose to ignore it. After all, she had hurt his mother. In the elevator, Yi Liangqiu's legs were a little weak, and her fingers dug into Lin Xingyuan's arm. Chapter 1304. With Qin Anlan's power, she couldn't compete with Mu Yun. Lin Xingyuan nodded. I don't think so. He stroked her face with his fingers. Liangqiu, can I take you away? Abroad or the south? She looked at him in a daze. My uncle's private hospital needs a chief surgeon. He asked me to go there. It's in H City. The medical conditions there are not worse than B City. Liangqiu, come with me, okay? He held her face. As for the blood, we can use cold storage. Also, I will take good care of him in the future. I won't let him get hurt easily. Yi Liangqiu was stunned. After a long time, she said softly, Xingyuan, let me think about it. She buried her face in the crook of his arm. She cried because his arm was wet and warm, and it was very uncomfortable, but he couldn't bear to let go of her. He reached out and stroked her hair gently. You can come back if you want to. She shook her head desperately and tried to suppress herself. After a long time, she buried her face in his arm and said softly, Xingyuan, I'll go to H City with you. Lin Xingyuan was ecstatic. He wanted to kiss her, but he didn't dare to do so. She was like a goddess in his heart. He couldn't offend her easily. Back in the ward, Mu Yun was already asleep, accompanied by Aunt Zhong. Seeing Yi Liangqiu come back, Aunt Zhong felt a little guilty. She said softly, Miss Yi, I'm sorry. I didn't expect this to happen. It's okay. Yi Liangqiu looked down. But we're going to H City in a few days. Aunt Zhong was stunned, and couldn't say anything for a long time. Miss Yi treated her well, but she still didn't listen to her. She took Mu Yun out this afternoon, which caused trouble. Aunt Zhong said softly, I know, Miss Yi. I'll pack my things later. Yi Liangqiu didn't blame her because it was useless. I'll give you 3 months' salary. Yi Liangqiu said and looked out of the window. It was time to go. She didn't see Qin Anlan for the next few days. However, when Mu Yun was discharged from the hospital, Lady Qin's maid came over and said that Lady Qin wanted to see her. Yi Liangqiu thought that Qin Anlan would not be there, so it was okay to meet him. Crispy Sleeve pushed open the door of the ward. Lady Qin was lying down. She looked a little more tired than before. Old lady, Miss Yi is here. Soft Sleeves went over and gently put a pillow behind Lady Qin's waist. Yi Liangqiu stood there calmly. Half sitting, Lady Qin raised her eyes and looked at Yi Liangqiu sharply. I thought you would please me more or less. Crying and begging for your forgiveness. Begging you to let me in? Yi Liangqiu smiled softly. I don't want to provoke you, so let's talk about something gentle, okay? Anlan went to see you. Lady Qin's eyes were like torches. She looked at the girl in front of her and said in an aggressive tone. Yi Liangqiu nodded slightly. Yes. He warned me not to provoke you again. He said that if I dared to offend you again, I would regret living in this world. Yi Liangqiu looked at Lady Qin. Are you satisfied with what he said? Lady Qin's voice was a little exasperated. I won't let you in. What an unpleasant personality. Coincidentally, I don't want to enter the Qin family's door either. Yi Liangqiu's voice was cold. Chapter 1305. Crispy Sleeve hurried forward and gently patted her chest. She scolded Yi Liangqiu. Miss Yi, please don't say too much. The old lady's health isn't good. When she gets angry, no one will have a good life. That's what I think too. Yi Liangqiu took something out of her pocket and placed it in front of Lady Qin. I think after seeing this, we won't have to have such unpleasant conversations anymore. Lady Qin had already heard about Mu Yun's situation from Crispy Sleeve. But after reading the report, she frowned. This child really is sick. And it wasn't a light illness. It was hard to say if he could inherit the Qin family's business. In Lady Qin's life, the thing she disliked the most was taking risks. What's more, this risk involved Yi Liangqiu, the Yi Liangqiu she disliked. After weighing the pros and cons, she made a decision. It's good that he's gone. I'll give you some money. Don't ever tell Anlan that this child is his. It's best if he never comes back. Lady Qin's words were heartless. Yi Liangqiu just smiled. I can still afford to raise my own child. Lady Qin was stunned. After a long time, she said, I heard that you got together with a doctor. Yes. Yi Liangqiu didn't hide it. I'll go to H City with him. Lady Qin was a little disappointed. She had thought that the Qin family had a descendant. That child was really good. But she didn't expect that he was sick. And now, Anlan was messing around in New York. She had to stop him. Cheng Cheng was the only daughter-in-law in her heart. She was smart, beautiful, likable, and had a pure bloodline. Lady Qin sighed. Let's go. Just pretend that I don't know about this. Yi Liangqiu knew that people were heartless, but at that moment, she felt a little sad. There was no one else but her for Mu Yun. Perhaps leaving was the best choice. After she left, Lady Qin looked at the list for a long time and said to her confidant, if the child is not sick, if Yi Liangqiu's body is soft, maybe. Crisp Sleeve helped her take down the pillow and lightly advised, old lady, don't think too much. Young master is still young, there will be plenty of opportunities in the future. Lady Qin snorted. He's in New York now, mesmerized by that little vixen. How can he still think about having children? As far as she knew, Pei Chichi's health wasn't good. She shouldn't have been able to give birth a long time ago. Soft Sleeve came over and said a few words. After saying that, Lady Qin was shocked and angry. Really? Millimeter Crispy Sleeve nodded. Lady Qin thought for a moment. Let's keep this a secret for now. Not many people know about this. Even if Tang Yu noticed it, he probably didn't want to alert the enemy. She sighed in her heart. Anlan can have any kind of woman he wants. Why does he have to target his wife? Crispy Sleeve smiled faintly. I've seen Pei Chichi. Old lady should have seen her a few times too. Don't you think she looks like someone? Lady Qin thought for a long time. Her eyes lit up and she looked at her personal maid. You mean Yi Liangqiu? Crispy Sleeve nodded. Old lady, think again. Who did young master meet first? Of course it's Yi Liangqiu. I know that she entered King Entertainment at the age of 19. Lady Qin didn't hesitate. Crispy Sleeve nodded again. Old lady, don't you think that young master treats Yi Liangqiu very special? Young master, if you want to make old madam happy, then marry Su Cheng. Qin Anlan glanced at Lady Qin and didn't say anything. After he left, Lady Qin lay on the bed and sighed. Soft Sleeve, you saw it. He's so stubborn. Lady Qin sat up slowly. After a long time, she said softly, give him some more time. Soft Sleeve nodded. Another year passed. Qin Anlan was still mainly in New York and rarely came back. Lady Qin was trimming the peach blossoms in the courtyard. The flowers have already fallen, but he hasn't come back. She paused for a moment before continuing. Recently, King Entertainment has been suppressed by Boy Yi. Obviously, Tang Yu knows that Pei Chichi is with Anlan. Soft Sleeve smiled lightly. Young master can handle it. Chapter 1307. When Lady Qin asked, Soft Sleeve thought about it and said, she's still in H City. She's living a peaceful life. Hearing this, Lady Qin was silent for a while, then sighed, she's quiet and calm. Soft Sleeve, do you think she doesn't want to marry into a rich family? Lady Qin felt that she was old and couldn't understand these young people. Soft Sleeve smiled. How could that be? She saw that the old lady didn't like her, so she backed out. This is also good. It's just a pity for that child. Lady Qin sighed, if only she wasn't sick. It was early summer, and Lady Qin was still dressed thickly. She was pushed into the courtyard by Soft Sleeve and looked at the flowers in the courtyard that were blooming. She pursed her lips. I met Mrs. Su yesterday. The youngest daughter of the Su family is already 25 years old. She can't keep waiting for Anlan. When she said this, Soft Sleeve was shocked. She thought to herself, young master is already married, so there's no chance between him and Su Cheng. Why did the old lady say that? Did she have some plans in mind? Sure enough, her guess was correct. Madame Qin slowly stood up and walked to a bush of flowers. She plucked the flower that bloomed the most and then slowly said, Su Xiu, accompany me to the south. I heard that the scenery there isn't bad at this time of year. Soft Sleeve nodded, okay. Old lady, let's go enjoy the scenery. As for the person who asked the old lady to meet, let's not see him. Old Lady Qin looked at her and smiled after a while. You know me. I just don't understand. The old lady clearly doesn't like Miss Yi, so why do you still want to see her? Soft Sleeve hesitated for a moment before asking. Old Lady Qin's heart was like a mirror. How could this Soft Sleeve not guess? She just smiled. I'm not looking at her, I'm looking at my grandson. Soft Sleeve only pursed her lips and smiled, not saying much. A week later, Lady Qin and Soft Sleeve arrived in H City. The black RV drove to a small villa in H City. The white European-style villa was unique. Although it was small, it was very cozy. From the outside, the small garden inside was also well maintained. It was early in the morning. Little Mu Yun was sitting in the garden, digging something. Yi Liangqiu walked over, pulled him up, and wiped his hands. Then, the two of them stood together. One big and one small, they looked very cozy. Lady Qin sat in the limousine and watched. Her voice was indifferent. Looking at him like this, I can't tell that there's something wrong with this child. He looks so good. Lady Qin thought of her relatives from the side branch of the Qin family. None of their children looked as good as Yi Muyun. What a pity. Crispy Sleeve stayed by her side and patted Lady Qin's hand. If old madam feels that it's a pity, there's nothing to be regretful about. The heir of the Qin family must have a good body. Lady Qin's tone was firm. Qingxiu's heart skipped a beat and she didn't dare to say anything else. She couldn't figure out what the old lady was thinking. At this moment, Lin Xingyuan also came out from the living room. He was dressed neatly. He leaned over and kissed little Mu Yun, then touched Yi Liangqiu's arm. Only then did he get into the car and slowly drive out of the villa. When he brushed past Lady Qin's car, Lin Xingyuan didn't notice it. Lady Qin looked and sighed. They're a good match. Chapter 1308. Why? Do you feel sorry for that girl? Lady Qin turned her head and smiled faintly. Soft Sleeve immediately lowered her head. How could that be? I feel sorry for the old lady the most. Lady Qin's gaze was dignified. It's good that you understand the severity of the situation. Old lady? Soft Sleeve couldn't help but exclaim. If you do this, young master will blame the old lady in the future. Lady Qin's gaze was still on the adult and child in the yard. After a while, she laughed softly. You really know what I'm thinking. Soft Sleeve didn't dare to say another word. She wanted to persuade her, but she didn't dare. The old lady would hurt young master if she did this. She clearly knew that young master really liked Yi Liangqiu, but she still did this. When young master couldn't extricate himself, Soft Sleeve didn't dare to continue thinking. Lady Qin looked at Soft Sleeve. You know me. I never change my mind once I've decided on something. Go and invite Miss Yi over for a chat. Miss Yi might not be willing, Soft Sleeve said in a low voice. But she still got out of the car. Lady Qin watched her walk to the front of the villa. She saw Yi Liangqiu let the child in first. Then she walked out, opened the car door, and sat beside Lady Qin. Long time no see, Miss Yi. Lady Qin's voice was a little stiff. Yi Liangqiu's voice was indifferent. Long time no see, Lady Qin. Aren't you curious why I came to find you? Lady Qin waited for a long time, but she didn't speak again, so she said unhappily. Yi Liangqiu smiled. You're not here to see us, right? Lady Qin was stunned. Soft Sleeve, who was in front, almost laughed out loud. Yi Liangqiu paused for a moment before continuing. Lady Qin, Mu Yun's health isn't very good. My focus is on him. If Lady Qin needs help, I'm afraid I won't be able to help. After she finished speaking, Lady Qin frowned while Qingxiu praised her. Although Yi Liangqiu had been promoted by King Entertainment, one had to admit that she was very smart. It was no wonder that the young master liked her so much that he didn't dare to admit it. Lady Qin's heart was full of bitterness. She squinted at Yi Liangqiu and said, How can you be sure that I have ulterior motives? Because I don't see a trace of warmth in your eyes. Yi Liangqiu said in a low voice, Lady Qin, I just want to live a peaceful life. I don't think you will deny me such a chance, right? Lady Qin narrowed her eyes. What if I say that I'm willing to accept you as my daughter-in-law? Yi Liangqiu smiled faintly. Then should I accept it? Lady Qin's face changed greatly. Miss Yi, don't push your luck. You're the one who's pushing your luck. Yi Liangqiu's voice was also full of coldness. Mu Yun is Qin Anlan's child, but back then, he wanted me to take the morning after pill. Then why do you still have a child? Lady Qin's voice was dignified. Yi Liangqiu said lightly, It was the first time I had a child. I didn't understand at that time. There was a touch of distance in her eyes. If it weren't for that pill, perhaps Mu Yun wouldn't be living in such pain. Have you ever regretted it? Lady Qin narrowed her eyes and looked at her. Yi Liangqiu lowered her eyes. I'm living very well now, but if Lady Qin insists on having her way and makes things difficult for me, I'm afraid that one day, I'll regret it. At that time, Madam might also regret it. You hurt my son, so I'll hurt your son. Chapter 1309. Lady Qin was stunned. After a long while, she came back to her senses. You're very bold. Madam is a mother, and so am I. Yi Liangqiu pursed her lips tightly, and then smiled lightly. I hope Madam won't make things difficult for me. She pushed the door open, and when she got out of the car, her legs were weak. She clenched her fingers, and her heart was filled with anger. She knew very well that Lady Qin only wanted to use her to push Pei Chichi away, and then the position of Mrs. Qin would belong to Su Cheng. She, Yi Liangqiu, was just a springboard. She felt a little sad. What she didn't want, others would want to force on her. Lady Qin didn't stop her. After the car door closed, Lady Qin said lightly, She's just too smart. She's not as simple as Su Cheng. Soft Sleeve said cautiously, As long as young master likes it. Lady Qin glared at her. Anlan likes to fool around. Are you going to let him do what he wants? Soft Sleeve didn't say anything. Lady Qin looked in the direction of the villa again, and her face was cold. Looks like she's not willing. No one would be willing. Soft Sleeve didn't dare to say that. Let's go. Lady Qin said in a low voice, and the black limousine slowly drove away. After the car drove away, a red sports car also drove past slowly. Sitting in the driver's seat was a young girl wearing sunglasses. After driving past, her gaze fell in the direction of the villa. Long time no see. The car slowly chased after the black limousine. The car drove so fast that it barely brushed past the car. Old witch! I'll hit you to death. The red sports car sped away. Lady Qin was shocked. These young people are too outrageous. Soft Sleeve massaged her arm. Old madam, do you want to go to the hospital for a checkup? I'm fine. Lady Qin sounded unhappy. Let's go to the airport. Su Xiu heaved a sigh of relief. In her heart, she was willing to let Yi Liangqiu live a simple life. Young master did like her, but young master had let her down. Moreover, Yi Liangqiu had also found a suitable person. However, peace did not come. With the arrival of Lady Qin, Yi Liangqiu's peaceful life was completely disrupted. Lin Xingyuan did not return that night because of a medical accident. It was a simple surgery with Lin Xingyuan as the chief surgeon, but the patient died on the operating table. The patient died because there was a large deviation between the surgical site and the image. The patient's family immediately sealed off the hospital. Because the hospital was a private hospital, the patient's family was also well known in the local area, so this matter was not easy to deal with. Furthermore, the deceased's husband had threatened to put Lin Xingyuan in jail. The hospital was opened by Lin Xingyuan's uncle. Although he wanted to save him, he was powerless. After receiving the call, Yi Liangqiu hurried to the hospital, but Lin Xingyuan had already been detained. Yi Liangqiu met Lin Xingyuan's uncle, Lin Hengshu. The men of the Lin family all looked elegant, and she could see the shadow of Lin Xingyuan in him. It's not that I don't want to protect Xingyuan. This time, he was maliciously framed. I went to investigate the mistakes in the middle, but I couldn't find anything. Lin Hengshu sighed. Liangqiu, I'm afraid I can't protect him this time. Uncle Lin, Xingyuan wouldn't make such a mistake. Yi Bingqiu looked at Lin Hengshu. Lin Hengshu looked at her, wanting to say something but hesitating. After a while, he said in a low voice, "Only you can save him." Chapter 13:10. But it was different this time. The other party obviously didn't care about human lives. He only cared about killing Xingyuan. Yi Liangqiu was stunned. Me? Yes. Lin Hengshu said tactfully, think about it. Who do you know that can solve such a problem? Yi Liangqiu thought of Lady Qin. Could she have done it? She didn't want to go to Lady Qin, but she didn't ask for it. Xingyuan might have to go to jail for 10 years. Don't worry, uncle. I'll think of a way. Yi Liangqiu smiled bitterly. She understood what Lin Hengshu meant. Xingyuan was so good to her. If there was no other choice, she should sacrifice herself once. Yi Liangqiu went downstairs quietly. She sat in the car and felt a little tired. Was her peaceful life coming to an end? She took out her phone and was about to call Lady Qin. She didn't hesitate, because she was afraid that if she hesitated, she would lose her courage. Before she could make the call, the car door opened. She looked up at the person outside the window. It was Meng Qingcheng. She had met him once. Our CEO wants to see Miss Yi. Meng Qingcheng said calmly. Yi Liangqiu looked at him, then slowly put down her phone and got out of the car. A handsome man stood next to the car in front with his hands behind his back. He looked especially noble in the night. But as she looked at him, she felt a little lonely. Yi Liangqiu walked over slowly and stood in front of him. Mr. Tang. I'll help you save Lin Xingyuan. You, call Qin Anlan and tell him about Yi Muyun's existence. Stall him for 3 months. Tang Yu said straightforwardly. Yi Liangqiu looked at the unfathomable man in front of her and pursed her lips. Did you do what happened to Xingyuan? No. Tang Yu didn't get angry. He just answered her calmly. She believed him when he said that. Tang Yu really didn't look like someone who would use such despicable means. She pursed her lips. What do I get out of working with you? You don't need to be controlled by others. You can even anger the person you want to anger to death. Tang Yu smiled. Yi Liangqiu looked down. It seems that Mr. Tang has seen through everything. I happened to be looking for my wife, so I paid extra attention to Miss Yi. I hope you don't mind. Tang Yu smiled faintly. Trust me. If you cooperate with me, it'll be easier for you to escape. Or rather, it'll be more respectful. Yi Liangqiu narrowed her eyes. Also, I can send people to protect you and your child. Tang Yu's tone was indifferent. At least I can guarantee that you can choose whether to stay or leave after this. Yi Liangqiu looked at the calm man in front of her. It was hard to imagine that he could still be so calm after losing his wife. And he seemed to read her mind. He smiled lightly, lowered his head, and looked up at the boundless night. After a long time, he said, Yi Liangqiu, if you have been waiting for someone, then you will get used to it. As long as she is well, one day, she will come back to you. She was stunned. This is 100 million. I think you should know what to do. He put the check in her hand. As for how to use it, it's up to you. Tonight, he will arrive in B City. Tang Yu's tone was still calm. Pei Chichi will come back with him. After saying that, he turned around and left. She looked at the check in her hand and smiled softly. Yes, a more honorable way. Finally, she picked up her phone and dialed Kaim's number. Chapter 13:11. Miss Yi. Kaim was about to go to the airport in B City to pick up the plane when he received a call from Yi Liangqiu. He was very surprised. It's me. Yi Liangqiu's voice was as cold as the night. Can you tell President Qin? His son is in H City. He broke his leg and needs his Rh negative blood. Kaim was stunned. Kaim trembled. Son? President Qin's son? Yi Liangqiu's son? He held his phone and couldn't say anything for a long time. About a minute later, Kaim found his voice. I'll tell President Qin later. Please rest assured, Miss Yi. From the bottom of his heart, Kaim had some feelings for Yi Liangqiu. After all, he had watched her grow from a little girl to a heavenly queen. He also knew that she and President Qin had lived together for a while. However, he didn't expect that someone would die. Yi Liangqiu's voice was indifferent. Thank you. Kaim slid his hand down and smiled. This time, it was a big deal. President Qin came back with Pei Chichi. At this moment, Yi Liangqiu said that she was pregnant. Kaim sighed. Everything was for the sake of the child. After Yi Liangqiu finished the phone call, she went to the detention center. Just as Tang Yu had said, the family of the deceased had withdrawn their lawsuit and Lin Xingyuan was released. In addition, Meng Qingcheng was also there. He gave Yi Liangqiu a piece of information, which contained some unknown transactions of Lady Qin. Yi Liangqiu didn't show it to Lin Xingyuan, but he could guess it. Meng Qingcheng left soon. Before he left, he just said lightly, "Don't forget your deal with Mr. Tang." Yi Liangqiu nodded. After he left, Lin Xingyuan got into the car, sat next to her, and slowly fastened his seat belt. She also silently. "Liangqiu, are you going to leave?" He finally asked with difficulty. He clearly knew that she would never belong to him, but he still kept her for a year. This year, they lived very well. He didn't force her to do anything, and she treated him as her closest relative. He helped her take care of Mu Yun. Sometimes, she would wait for him to come back from his shift in the middle of the night to cook for him. Lin Xingyuan was not a person with strong emotions. The feelings he wanted were faint. Just like this, it was enough. He sat, aware that she was leaving. However, he wanted to ask her a question that he had wanted to ask for a long time. If this continues, will you like me? Even if it was just a little bit. Yi Liangqiu's hands were on the steering wheel. After a long time, she smiled and said, "Xingyuan, of course." Lin Xingyuan smiled as well. He covered his face with his hands and let out a long sigh. "Liangqiu, you should go. I can't protect you." He was not afraid, but when he realized that he would become her burden and her weakness, he had no right to say that he liked her. He was not such a naive person. He said in a low voice, "If there's a chance, give Mu Yun a younger brother or sister. You know." Yi Liangqiu slowly turned her head and looked at his painful and helpless eyes. After a long time, she said softly, "I know. Liangqiu, will you blame me? Blame him for giving up on her so easily?" She shook her head and put her finger on his lips. "Xingyuan, I understand you, and you understand me. These words do not need to be said." There was no heart-wrenching pain in their separation, only a faint regret. They had many friends, but not many lovers. This was their current state. Chapter 13:12. Lin Xingyuan opened it slowly, and there was a platinum ring inside. It was a simple ring, but it was elegant and beautiful. "It's my mother's." He smiled. "Liangqiu, this is for you, as a souvenir." Yi Liangqiu looked at it and took it. She pulled off the chain around her neck, put the ring on, and put it back on. She touched it gently with her fingers. "I like it very much." Lin Xingyuan smiled bitterly and didn't say anything else. He couldn't give her what he really wanted to give. "I'll always be here. If you're tired one day, come back." He reached out and stroked her long hair. Liangqiu, can I kiss you? It had been a year, and he hadn't kissed her even once. But now, he wanted to kiss her. Yi Liangqiu didn't say anything. Lin Xingyuan leaned over and kissed her lightly on the lips. Just for a second, what he felt was not sweetness, but heartbreak. Liangqiu, I'm sorry I can't protect you. He hugged her gently. Yi Liangqiu rested her chin on his shoulder and said lightly, Xingyuan, be my brother. He was stunned, but he quickly reacted. Okay. He reached out and stroked her hair. You have to be well. From that night onwards, Lin Xingyuan knew that Yi Liangqiu would never fall in love with him. She drove her back, and that night, she moved to the hotel with Mu Yun, late at night. City B Airport. Pei Chichi avoided Qin Anlan's sight and ran to the washroom. She ran to the wrong place. At that moment, she saw a handsome back view, going to the washroom. Have you seen enough? The man's movements were still slow, and he didn't seem uncomfortable at all. His voice was also a little lazy. Pei Chichi's mouth was wide open, so wide that an egg could be stuffed in. Tang Yu zipped up and turned his body. There wasn't much expression on his face. But in his eyes, there was a fire that she couldn't see. 2 years. For 2 whole years, there was no news of her. Even if he guessed that she was alive, he would not be able to find her. Finally, he found her. As for Pei Chichi, she looked at the place where he had just zipped up, and then at his nose. Her face was a little red, and her body was a little warm. She actually had that kind of shameful feeling towards a strange man. It was the kind of feeling that made her want to throw herself at him. Even, she wanted to tear off his clothes and slap him. She wanted to slap his body. The kind with nothing hanging. How shameful. She cupped her face and took a step back. I'm in the wrong place. The man took a step forward and walked towards her step by step. In the end, she was forced between the wall and his body. Just now, where were you looking at? His voice was mellow and hoarse, making her blush even more. She bit her lips and looked at him helplessly. After a long time, she said softly, I didn't. You're lying. Tang Yu's face was next to her ear. Count your heartbeat. Isn't it a lot faster? Her heartbeat was very fast, but his was even faster. Because his Chichi had forgotten about him, she didn't remember him, but she remembered his body. Pei Chichi turned her head. I'm not counting. But she turned her head too fast, and her lips brushed against his. Tang Yu looked at her with a burning gaze. Pei Chichi took a step back, but there was nowhere to go. Her head hit the wall. Chapter 13:13. Tears welled up in Pei Chichi's eyes. She looked at the man in front of her. It hurts. She pouted and wanted to touch the wound on the back of her head. However, a big palm pressed on the back of her head faster than her. Is it here? She nodded. She felt that he was rubbing her head comfortably. She almost thanked him. When it didn't hurt anymore, she remembered that she was a stranger to this man. Tang Yu couldn't help smiling when he saw her alert eyes. Why? Are you afraid that I'll do something to you? He looked around. Well, there's no one here. There's no if. Pei Chichi said quickly. I'm leaving. Let go of me. Tang Yu didn't let go of her. He looked at her and said, Do you want me to walk you out? No need. She broke free from him and jumped away. She looked like a young girl in her 20s. She was already 25 years old at this time. There was a smile in Tang Yu's eyes. He didn't say anything else and just held her hand. At that moment, Pei Chichi's heart was beating wildly. How could she be so irresistible? Oh no, she cheated. She climbed the wall. His palm was a little dry. He held her sweaty hand. Pei Chichi wanted to break free, but she only managed to do so for a moment before he held her tightly again. Behave yourself. His voice was a little low. Otherwise, I'll lock you in the men's room. She glared at him. Ming 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 was so noble, but he was so shameless. As for him, he calmly and naturally held her hand as they walked out of the room. As soon as they went out, they saw Qin Anlan waiting for her. Pei Chichi immediately shook off Tang Yu's hand and stuck out her tongue. My husband. Tang Yu and Qin Anlan looked at each other. When Qin Anlan saw Pei Chichi shake off Tang Yu's hand, he wasn't happy. Instead, his eyes dimmed. She had never allowed him to hold her hand for more than 2 minutes, saying it was like holding a child's hand. So it wasn't that she didn't like him, but he wasn't the one she wanted to hold hands with. He just looked at her like that. When she came in front of him, he reached out and ruffled her hair. "I'll get old Zhong to send you back to the apartment. Be good and sleep. What about you?" Pei Chichi took the key and looked at her with her cute eyes. Qin Anlan smiled and said, "I have to go back to the company for a meeting." Pei Chichi replied with an "oh," then hopped towards the exit. Tang Yu didn't follow them, nor did Qin Anlan. The two of them stayed and had a fight. "She is now my wife." Qin Anlan's voice was a little mocking. "Tang Yu, she has lost her memory. If you stimulate her, it will only make her more painful." Tang Yu's pupils suddenly contracted, and he stared at Qin Anlan. In the end, he still left. So what if she had lost her memory? Next, Qin Anlan couldn't care less about Chichi. He had plenty of opportunities. Qin Anlan also got into the car and prepared to go to the company. However, Kaim rushed over and stood outside the car window. Her breathing was a little erratic. "President Qin, we have to go to H City." Qin Anlan's fingers clenched the steering wheel. If he wasn't wrong, H City. Yi Liangqiu was living in H City now. He narrowed his eyes at Kaim. Kaim didn't hesitate at all. Yi Liangqiu's child is 7 years old. He is President Qin's child. Qin Anlan's eyes narrowed even more. He looked at Kaim and said gloomily, "Did she tell you?" He continued, "The child's name is Yi Muyun. He has Rh negative blood." Chapter 13-14. At this point, Qin Anlan had a rough idea of what had happened. He opened the car door, got out of the car, and walked quickly towards the airport. As he walked, he said, "Prepare the private plane to H City." Kaim was stunned for a moment before he followed him. At this moment, Qin Anlan's phone rang. It was old Zhong, and he sounded very anxious. "Young master, Miss Pei is missing." Qin Anlan pursed his lips and clenched his fingers. He looked at Kaim and said, "Go down and find her. Send her back to my apartment." Kaim nodded and quickly got off the plane. However, as soon as Qin Anlan's plane flew away, Kaim was stopped by Meng Qingcheng. Meng Qingcheng leaned against the front of a black Bentley and looked at Kaim with a faint smile. "Are you sure you want to look for her?" Kaim was stunned and looked at Meng Qingcheng. Meng Qingcheng stood up and walked towards Kaim. "You should know that Qin Anlan is playing with fire. Pei Chichi doesn't belong to him. Kaim, I believe you're a smart person. You know which side to stand on." After saying that, he handed over a check, which was enough for Kaim to live a good life without working for the rest of his life. Kaim looked down for a while and said in a low voice, "Mr. Tang is giving me too much." Meng Qingcheng said solemnly, "In Mr. Tang's heart, Pei Chichi is priceless." He paused for a moment. "Kaim, do you really think that Qin Anlan loves Pei Chichi? If it was love, he wouldn't have left B City. He would have gone to H City." Kaim didn't say anything. Meng Qingcheng patted him on the shoulder and said, "This isn't betrayal. This is to help President Qin find himself." After saying that, Meng Qingcheng left. Kaim stood there for a long time. He knew that Pei Chichi was probably with Tang Yu right now. Looking at the check, she thought about how President Qin and Pei Chichi had not had a breakthrough in their relationship for 2 years. Meng Qingcheng was right. This was not a betrayal. It was for the good of President Qin. When Meng Qingcheng got into the car and saw Kaim standing there, his lips curved into a slight smile. He picked up his phone and looked at the number on it. His gaze turned gentle. "It's all settled. Yunji, today," he kissed her. But he wasn't sure about his feelings for her, so it could be considered as rejection. However, when he received her call, the night was not so lonely. Qin Anlan's private plane arrived at City H at 2 o'clock in the night. He rushed to the presidential suite on the top floor of the hotel where Yi Liangqiu lived. Late at night, Yi Muyun had already fallen asleep. There was only a dim yellow light in the suite. Yi Liangqiu came to open the door. The moment the door opened, both their gazes froze. He was travel-worn, while she was wearing a snow-white bathrobe. Her long hair was slightly wet and scattered behind her back like seaweed. Her beauty had always been soul-stirring on the screen, but at this moment, she was calm, like an ordinary wife waiting for her husband to return late. Qin Anlan looked at her for a long time, then walked in. "Where is he?" He tried to sound calm, but he was actually not calm. Yi Liangqiu walked towards the bedroom, and Qin Anlan followed behind. Then, he saw Yi Muyun, who looked like an angel. He was so cute, lying there so fragile. His face was a little pale, as if he had been sick for a long time. Yi Liangqiu handed a document to Qin Anlan. He didn't look at it immediately, but walked over and sat next to Yi Muyun. He raised his hand, hesitated for a moment, and finally placed it on his soft hair. Qin Anlan closed his eyes. This was his son. Chapter 13-15. Qin Anlan closed his eyes. This was his son. Qin Anlan's son. He let out a long breath and said in a suppressed voice, "Yi Liangqiu, you really deserve to die." She didn't make a sound. His fingers gently stroked his son's face. "He's had a blood transfusion?" Yi Liangqiu nodded. "Yes. But I don't know when the next time will be. There isn't enough Rh-negative blood in the blood bank. So, I'm taking on the role of the blood bank, right?" Qin Anlan's voice was a little hoarse. "If I don't need blood, I won't know of his existence for the rest of my life, right?" Yes," she said bluntly, deliberately provoking him. Qin Anlan didn't move. After a long time, his voice was very soft. "Yi Liangqiu, you really dare to say that? President Qin doesn't like to be lied to." She leaned against the door and looked at him. His fingers gently touched little Mu Yun's slightly cold face and closed his eyes. "Why didn't you say so earlier?" This time, she didn't answer. "Why did you look for me this time?" he continued to ask. Then he stood up and walked slowly to her. Her back was against the door. He raised his hand gently and pinched her cheek with one hand. "Yi Liangqiu, what are you thinking about?" He lowered his head and looked into her eyes. His eyes were burning. She didn't retreat. She looked into his eyes and sneered. "Qin Anlan, what am I thinking about? Don't you know? Don't play tricks with me." He pinched her face tightly and used half of his strength. Her eyes were watery, but she stubbornly didn't say a word. She just looked up and stared at him. "If you think I'm hateful and have ulterior motives, Qin Anlan, you can leave immediately," she said coldly. "I used up all my tricks a few years ago. Now, I don't think it's necessary to play tricks on President Qin. You don't care anymore, so you don't want to play anymore, right?" He suddenly let go of her face and pursed his lips. At that moment, he noticed an exquisite platinum ring hanging from her collarbone. Strange, he was sure he had never seen it before. Qin Anlan narrowed his eyes and looked at Yi Liangqiu. "Who sent this?" "It has nothing to do with President Qin." She tried to avoid him, but he grabbed her shoulder with one hand and took the ring with the other. He tore it off. The excessive force left a long red mark on her neck, and her skin was a little broken. The ring fell into his palm. He looked at it carefully and lowered his gaze to look at her. "Is it from Lin Xingyuan?" In the past 2 years, although he had not had much contact with her, he knew that she had always been with Lin Xingyuan. And now that he had just returned to Bi City, she found out. He couldn't help but suspect that she was playing tricks. Yi Liangqiu wanted to take it back, but she couldn't. He pressed her shoulder with one hand and pinned her firmly to the door. He played with the ring with the other hand and said coldly, "Do you love him?" When he thought about how this damned woman had brought his child to live with Lin Xingyuan, and how she had allowed that man to hug her, a hint of anger rose in his heart. He stared at her eyes, not letting go of any expression on her face. "It has nothing to do with President Qin." Yi Liangqiu looked down and smiled. "President Qin can't be delusional and think that I want to tie you up, right? You don't." He let go of her a little. She wanted to straighten up, but he pressed her down again. Chapter 13:16. Yi Liangqiu, you'd better not move. Otherwise, I can't guarantee that Mu Yun won't see what he shouldn't see. He warned her in a low voice, then took her hand and walked out to the living room. The door to the guest bedroom was closed. Adults shouldn't let a child hear an argument. She was forcefully thrown to the sofa, like a piece of rag. In this world, he was the only one who dared to treat her like this. Yi Liangqiu had just gotten up, but she was pushed back down again. He pressed her body with one leg, not letting her move. Qin Anlan, are you crazy? Her long hair spread out hopelessly, but she was still breathtakingly beautiful even without makeup. He pinched her chin with his fingers. You're so beautiful even when you're angry. Is he obsessed with you? His voice was extremely hoarse as he spoke, and his fingers touched her red lips. She had changed a lot from the Yi Liangqiu of 5 or 6 years ago. Compared to the young and inexperienced Yi Liangqiu of the past, she was now exuding the aura of a mature woman. Her entire body made men crazy. Especially when she was 172 centimeters tall, and when she rolled up her bathrobe, her legs were straight and fair, making one want to. Had she once coiled her legs around Lin Xingyuan's waist? Had she also enjoyed Lin Xingyuan's body? Qin Anlan's eyes seemed to be on fire. He was angry and jealous. Yes. Yi Liangqiu raised her chin and smiled instead of getting angry. She smiled delicately and put her slender arms around his neck. Qin Anlan, Xingyuan likes my body. What about you? There was a storm in his eyes. Do you like him? Before she could say anything, he had already lowered his body and pressed himself against her, letting her feel his eagerness. His face was very close to hers, and his gaze was deep. He has me, okay? Can he also make you feel pain and happiness like that? I don't remember. Yi Liangqiu couldn't struggle. She felt too embarrassed, so she turned her face to the side. Qin Anlan moved forward again. Can you remember some of it like this? Her eyes widened. She couldn't believe that he would do such a thing to her. He actually did such a shameful thing to her through her clothes. As they rubbed against each other, her bathrobe was completely undone. His coat was thrown aside, and his belt was hanging around his waist in a mess. Qin Anlan, are you crazy? She avoided his kiss and resisted with all her might. However, compared to his strength, she was so fragile and soft. The difference in strength between a man and a woman was very clear at this moment. He pressed her down like a hot knife through butter, and he looked down at her from above while his gaze carried a wisp of coldness. Yi Liangqiu, why do you have to be like this? You already have a child, so it's no longer fun to play this kind of game of trying to refuse too much. He leaned in to continue the kiss. A slap landed on his face. Yi Liangqiu gasped and glared at him. Qin Anlan, I love Xingyuan. His gaze became somewhat aghast. She said that she loved Lin Xingyuan. Yes, I love him. She looked straight at him. Does your pride allow you to want such a woman? Qin Anlan, I'm no longer the Yi Liangqiu of the past. I won't wait for you to look back at me like a fool. I won't have any hope. She said coldly, now, I've fallen in love with someone else. He maintained his position for a while before slowly releasing her. Chapter 13:17. His face was still burning hot, but he didn't care. He narrowed his eyes and looked at her. Yi Liangqiu, you're really good. Same to you. Compared to President Qin, I think I'm loyal enough. She laughed coldly. He looked at her. I hope your love for Lin Xingyuan will continue. It's none of President Qin's business. No matter who I love, I won't love you like a fool anymore. She raised her chin. But Qin Anlan caught the meaning in her words. She loved him? Did she give birth to Mu Yun because of love? But Qin Anlan didn't ask. If he did, everything would be different. At this moment, a timid voice came from the door. Mom. Yi Liangqiu turned her head and saw her son standing at the door. She froze. And Qin Anlan moved very quickly. He quickly blocked Yi Liangqiu's body and said in a low voice, button up your clothes. Damn it, her bathrobe had fallen apart. Mu Yun had seen everything that should and shouldn't be seen. Yi Liangqiu bit her lip and quickly buttoned up her clothes. Qin Anlan waved and called Mu Yun over. The little boy was a little hesitant, but he still walked over slowly. The little boy was wearing snow-white pajamas. It was the one-piece kind, and there was a little tail at the back. He looked very cute. Qin Anlan's cold heart softened. He looked at the little boy and reached out to pull him into his arms. "I'm Daddy." This child was very good-looking. He had taken on the good points of him and Yi Minchio. He gently rubbed his soft hair. He finally knew why he was called Mu Yun. His hair really looked like soft clouds. Mu Yun shyly threw herself into his father's arms, resting her little face on his shoulder. She said softly, "Daddy, you don't like Mommy, do you?" Qin Anlan's body stiffened, but he quickly denied it. How could that be? Daddy didn't even hug Mommy, and he even bullied her. Mu Yun's voice was very soft, and there was also a hint of frustration in it. Qin Anlan tilted his head and glanced at Yi Lianglai. He pulled her over with one hand and made her sit on his lap. It was rare for him to be so tall, so the 172 kilograms Yi Liangqiu sitting on his lap didn't look out of place. "Look, Daddy and Mommy have a good relationship." He smiled, wanting to make his son's broken childhood a little happier. He was willing to do something to make Mu Yun happy. Mu Yun's little face turned red because he had never seen such a scene before. It wasn't just him. Even Yi Liangqiu wasn't used to it. She turned her body sideways and said in a low voice, "Qin Anlan, what are you doing? Do you really want to do something with me in front of your son?" His voice was also very low, and there was a hint of mockery in it. "I'd love to. Have you been hungry for so long that you can't be choosy?" She gritted her teeth. Unexpectedly, he actually answered her, and he said very seriously, "More than 2 years. Why, Miss Yi, do you want to be a good person and satisfy me just once?" He was shameless and shameless. She subconsciously hit him. He didn't dodge, and in the end, she slapped his face. "Mu Yun, do you see that? It's your mother who is bullying me." Qin Anlan's tone was indifferent, as if it wasn't a slap on his face, but a candid date. Mu Yun was stunned. Mommy was so fierce. Daddy seemed to be a big shot, and Mommy could hit him whenever she wanted. Chapter 13:18. Qin Anlan chuckled and said calmly, "Mu Yun, Mommy is a woman, so Daddy will give in to her." Yi Mu Yun glanced at his mother's bathrobe and didn't say anything. Yi Liangqiu picked up her son and said gently and calmly, "Mu Yun, why don't you go back to sleep? Mommy will carry you to bed." She carried a 7-year-old child easily. Qin Anlan looked at her quietly and didn't say anything. He just took little Mu Yun and said, "Let me carry him." So, little Mu Yun was carried by his father for the first time. His little face was slightly red because of shyness and excitement. He lay on Qin Anlan's shoulder and looked obedient. Yi Liangqiu's hands were empty. She looked at the father and son in front of her in a daze. It seemed that Qin Anlan had quickly accepted Mu Yun's existence. Mu Yun was the same. He didn't have the slightest resistance to this father who suddenly appeared. It seemed that she was the only one who couldn't accept it. She was against Qin Anlan's appearance from the bottom of her heart. She pursed her lips and followed him in. Qin Anlan carried little Mu Yun to the bed and covered the little boy with the quilt. He said gently, "Sleep early. Daddy, it's almost dawn." There was a touch of reluctance in little Mu Yun's eyes. "Daddy, I don't want to sleep. I'm afraid that when I wake up, Daddy will be gone." Qin Anlan felt a little sad when he heard that. He put his face close to little Mu Yun's and said in a low voice, "It won't happen again. I can guarantee that our Mu Yun will see Daddy every day when he wakes up." "What about Mommy?" Little Mu Yun tugged at his sleeve and asked in a low voice. Qin Anlan was stunned and didn't know how to answer him for a moment. The 7-year-old boy looked at him longingly. It was hard for him to refuse. So he forced a smile. "Of course, there's also Mom. Will you get married?" Little Mu Yun looked very cautious. Not only Qin Anlan, but also Yi Liangqiu couldn't handle such a problem. They had never intended to be together in the first place. Amidst the silence, little Mu Yun's face clearly showed that she was hurt. He looked at his father, then at his mother. He pursed his lips and buried his face in the pillow. He was obviously angry. Qin Anlan looked at Yi Liangqiu. The look in his eyes said, "You're angry just like that. How do you usually educate them?" Yi Liangqiu stared back at him. The look in his eyes said, "I inherited your genes." Qin Anlan didn't argue with her. He reached out and touched little Mu Yun's hair. He answered ambiguously, "Daddy and Mommy need to cultivate their relationship. Marriage isn't a child's play." Yi Liangqiu stood at the side and said mockingly, "Yes, marriage isn't a child's play." He glared at her for a while before he continued to coax little Mu Yun to sleep. He couldn't believe that he accepted this child so easily. He even forgot about Chichi's existence at this moment. Little Mu Yun looked up and pursed his pretty lips. He hesitated for a moment before asking, "Then will Daddy and Mommy sleep together at night?" "Well, yes." Qin Anlan smiled calmly. "Then we'll go to sleep." Yi Liangqiu was stunned when he said that. What was he saying? Sleep together? How could that be? However, Qin Anlan had already given Mu Yun a goodnight kiss and pulled her out of the room. Chapter 13-19. He had already taken off his belt and was unbuttoning his shirt one by one. Then, he threw the belt and shirt at the end of the bed. Yi Liangqiu looked at him for a long time. And he just stood there, looking at her. "Yi Liangqiu, didn't you spend so much effort to call me over for me to do this?" She pursed her lips and suddenly hugged his shirt. She stuffed it into his arms and said softly, "Get lost." Qin Anlan pursed his lips and smiled faintly. "Are you sure?" She didn't speak and her expression was slightly cold. He put on his clothes slowly and neatly. It seemed that he was going to leave. Yi Liangqiu stopped him and sounded a little angry. "Qin Anlan, I thought you wanted me to leave." His voice was a little soft, but there was an indescribable force in it. She pursed her lips and said with difficulty, "I think, for the sake of Mu Yun, let's call a truce. If I say, for the sake of Mu Yun, I want. Will you agree?" He said faintly without turning his head, so she couldn't see his expression. Yi Liangqiu was stunned for a moment. "Don't forget, you're married." "Why? You want to give your body to Lin Xingyuan?" he asked mockingly. Yi Liangqiu didn't reply. It was unwise to say anything at this moment. The more she didn't speak, the angrier he got. He didn't know what he was angry about. He pursed his lips and said coldly, "Come here and hug me." "What?" Yi Liangqiu was surprised. She looked up at his back and couldn't believe what she had heard. "You didn't hear it wrong. Come here and hug me. Make love with me." His voice was even colder. "Yi Liangqiu, this is my condition." With that, he turned his head slowly and looked at her. Her face was pale and he looked straight into her eyes as if he was looking for something. They looked at each other for a long time. Finally, she walked towards him slowly. She put her hand on his belt and gently unbuckled it. Qin Anlan didn't move. He only looked down at her from above, watching her do such a subservient thing. In his memory, she wasn't used to doing this. But she still did it. His Adam's apple bobbed uncontrollably as her fingers lightly unbuttoned his shirt. As he said, he hadn't touched a woman for over 2 years. Her body had always been what he desired. It was impossible for him not to be aroused. But a powerful big palm still caught her hand. Qin Anlan's eyes were burning. "Yi Liangqiu, what on earth do you want that you are willing to be so wronged?" He raised her hand and stared at her. "Is this the title of Mrs. Qin?" Her slender white hand was held by him. She did not struggle and only looked up at him. "It's your blood." Qin Anlan narrowed his eyes and pushed her away after a long time. "It better be like this." He went straight into the bathroom, and in a moment she heard the water running. He was taking a shower. Yi Liangqiu remembered that he didn't have a change of clothes, so she found a bathrobe in the closet and walked to the bathroom door. She wanted to call him, but then, she heard some strange noises. That was him, doing that. She wanted to retreat, but at this moment, the bathroom door was suddenly opened. Her arm was caught and she fell into a steamy chest. His face was stuck to the water vapor, but he could still feel the warmth. Yi Liangqiu looked up and was sucked in by two hot lips. Chapter 1320. Her body was folded uncomfortably in his arms and she couldn't move. Yi Liangqiu struggled angrily. Qin Anlan, what are you doing? He kissed her. No matter where her head was, he could still stick to her lips. And what was worse was that he was kissing her while finishing what he hadn't finished just now. Everything calmed down. He leaned his face against the side of her neck and panted lightly. His hot breath blew against the side of her neck. It was hot and uncomfortable. And she was afraid. Yi Liangqiu, this is marriage. You need to do this kind of thing at any time. His voice was low in her ears. Are you sure? You're so hungry that you can't be choosy. She leaned her back against the cold wall and gritted her teeth. But only she herself knew that her heart was trembling and her legs were weak. She would also be seduced by him, and she would also be moved and hurt. Yi Liangqiu, this isn't fun. He bit her neck. We can still be like before, right? Her body turned cold, and her voice was even colder. You mean, we can give Mu Yun a relatively happy childhood? His fingers stroked her face gently. With less scheming, Mu Yun will be much happier. Her eyes fell on his face and didn't move away. An unhappy marriage can't give him a complete family. I think you know that better than anyone else. He looked at her with narrowed eyes. Is your marriage with Pei Chichi happy? She suddenly laughed and leaned her head against the wall. He stared at her little face for a long time before he said softly, I like her. Yi Liangqiu was stunned. Like her? Yes, you can give up a lot of things if you like someone. She chuckled. Qin Anlan, I'll fulfill your wish. She turned around. Just like you said, I'll give Mu Yun a relatively happy childhood. He looked at her suspiciously. Yi Liangqiu, this doesn't seem like you. Then what do I have to do to be like me? She smiled coldly. Force you to divorce? He did not reply. Qin Anlan, I don't think we want to have anything to do with each other, so just put on a good show in front of Mu Yun. She seemed to be at the end of her patience. At this moment, Qin Anlan felt a kind of emptiness, an indescribable emptiness. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the woman in front of him. He could not see through her. He couldn't tell what she really wanted. It was definitely not Mu Yun's happiness. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but say coldly, I will. I hope you will too. Yi Liangqiu pulled open the bathroom door and walked out. Also, I hope what happened today will never happen again. I promise, there will be more, he said shamelessly. Yi Liangqiu bit her lip. Qin Anlan, you're shameless. He just looked at her. At that moment, they suddenly thought of the past. They thought of the short 2 to 3 months they had lived together. At that time, they were the closest and most unfamiliar people in the world. He allowed her to walk into his world, but not into his heart. Yi Liangqiu hated this feeling. She held her head with her hand and left. Qin Anlan did not pull her. He looked in the direction where she left with an unfathomable gaze. He could feel that the way she treated him was really different from before. In her eyes, he could not see the light from before. Chapter 1321. After showering, she lay on the bed with her back facing him. Even if it was her side, the curve was still beautiful. He lay down beside her and felt her body stiffen in an instant. Qin Anlan lay flat and put one hand under his head. He said calmly, I'm very tired. I don't have the energy to do anything to you. You don't have to be so chaste. Yi Liangqiu pursed her lips and didn't say a word. She was still curled up there and didn't move. Qin Anlan looked at her back and smiled. If you sleep like this, you'll probably be stiff tomorrow morning. Don't worry, I'm not interested in wood. With that, he closed his eyes. Sleep. She waited for a long time until his breathing was even. Then, she closed her eyes. Half an hour later, Qin Anlan opened his eyes. He was sleepy, but he still waited until she fell asleep. He was used to sleeping at this hour. But he wanted to see her, Qin Anlan gently flipped her over and propped his chin on his hand as he looked at her. His eyes were dark and deep. His fingers gently stroked her face. A strand of hair covered half of her face and playfully scattered on the snow-white bathrobe. He gently pushed it away. Her appearance was very different from before. Now, it was almost perfect. Qin Anlan watched on just like that, a sliver of softness slipping through his heart. After a long time, he retracted his hand, closed his eyes, and fell into a dream. In the dream, she was wearing an apron and cooking for him in the kitchen of the apartment. The morning sun shone on the side of her face. Her face was very soft, and it was more beautiful than any of the movies and scenes she had starred in. When Qin Anlan woke up, Yi Liangqiu hadn't woken up yet. He remembered that dream, and his heart couldn't help but soften a little. The way he looked at her was also gentle. He turned his body and looked at her face. He stretched out his hand and stretched his fingers down her neckline. The bathrobe spread open, and his eyes fell on her lower abdomen. It was flat and clean, without a trace. So she naturally gave birth to Mu Yun. At that moment, Qin Anlan wanted to go to the place where Mu Yun was born. With this thought in mind, he did it. When Yi Liangqiu woke up, she was trapped in his arms. His fingers were doing something indescribable. She was startled and moved back, but she almost fell off the bed after moving a few steps. Qin Anlan reached out and grabbed her. The scene froze. She was in her bathrobe, and he was fully clothed. Yi Liangqiu covered her clothes with one hand and glared at him. Qin Anlan, what are you doing? I just want to feel the path that Mu Yun has walked. He lowered his eyes and said rather coldly. Yi Liangqiu was speechless. She moved closer and buttoned her clothes. Rogue. He just smiled faintly and didn't say anything. When she got out of bed and went to the bathroom, he said faintly, "You seem to have a reaction just now. You should wash up." Yi Liangqiu suddenly turned her head. "You're thinking too much." He slowly raised his finger at her. Evil, she slammed the bathroom door shut and leaned against the door. Her legs were trembling. Biting her lip, she took a shower and went out. When she returned to the bedroom, Qin Anlan was not there. She heard some noise in the dining room, so she changed her clothes and went out. Chapter 13:22. I haven't eaten for nearly 24 hours. Qin Anlan's voice was a little faint. Do you mind if I eat first? Even though he said that, he took good care of little Mu Yun. Yi Liangqiu pursed her lips, sat down, and ate her breakfast in silence. In the silence, Qin Anlan looked up at her. She had tied her long hair into a ponytail today. She was wearing a thin knitted sweater and white slacks, which made her figure even more perfect, especially revealing a small part of her charming waist. He didn't remember that she liked to dress like this. However, his gaze lingered on it for a while longer before he said, after breakfast, take Mu Yun to the hospital for a checkup. Yi Liangqiu looked up at him and said, You don't believe me? I'm the child's father. Is there a problem with caring for him? His gaze fell on her face, and then he lowered his head to continue cutting the bread in his hand. His voice became even fainter. Also, Liangqiu, are you sure you want to say that in front of the child? Yi Liangqiu was stunned. He called her Liangqiu. He used to call her that, but that was a long, long time ago. Even if he called her that because of Mu Yun, her heart still palpitated. She was silent. Mu Yun looked at one and then the other, pursing his lips. After little Mu Yun returned to his bedroom, Qin Anlan took a cigarette and put it in his hand. The child is very sensitive. Liangqiu, don't make him unhappy. She didn't say anything, but just sneered. I know you blame me. He looked at her, but Yi Liangqiu, you never told me that you gave birth to a child. You made Mu Yun without a father for so long. He hadn't smoked, not because he didn't want to, but because Mu Yun was here. He didn't want his son to inhale second-hand smoke, so he had been restraining himself. He fell in love with the little guy the moment he saw him. Yi Liangqiu looked down. If you had known that I was pregnant, would you have let me give birth? He looked up, and so did she. They looked into each other's eyes. He didn't reply, and she heard the sound of flowers blooming and wilting. So he laughed softly and said self-deprecatingly, I knew it would be like this. How much do you know about me? Qin Anlan's eyes were filled with pain. How do you know that I don't want him? Yi Liangqiu's pupils shrank. Qin Anlan slowly walked over and gently brought her into his arms. A warm breath enveloped her body, and in such a warm embrace, she actually felt like crying. Liangqiu, I think you know what to do. I don't want to hurt Mu Yun. He whispered in her ear. However, that gentle voice seemed to have sent her into a frozen valley. After he finished speaking, he let go of her. That touch of warmth also disappeared. Half an hour later, in his white sports car, Yi Liangqiu pursed her lips. Why must we go to the hospital where Lin Xingyuan is? He obviously did it on purpose. Qin Anlan slowly fastened the seatbelt and said calmly, Mu Yun was originally examined by him, and I believe that Lin Xingyuan will be the best doctor for Mu Yun. He said it in a dignified manner, but Yi Liangqiu didn't believe his reason. Qin Anlan glanced at her again and started the car. I've already spoken to Lin Xingyuan on the phone. Chapter 1323. What? Can't bear to part with him? His tone was a little strange. Yi Liangqiu didn't bother to say anything to him. She just hugged Mu Yun. Little Mu Yun looked at Qin Anlan in front of him, and then looked at his mother with a curious expression. Is Dad jealous of Uncle Lin? Yi Liangqiu didn't say anything. Qin Anlan was also stunned for a moment. After a long time, he smiled and said, Mu Yun is so smart. Yi Liangqiu glared at his back. Qin Anlan saw it in the rearview mirror. He met her eyes and smiled. It had to be said that Qin Anlan's white teeth were quite beautiful. Yi Liangqiu was even angrier. The car drove to the hospital where Lin Xingyuan was. The car stopped. Qin Anlan got out of the car first and picked up little Mu Yun. In fact, 7-year-old children usually left by themselves, but he was absent from little Mu Yun's growth for a long time, so he felt that it was okay to spoil him a little. However, Yi Liangqiu said in a low voice, you don't have to spoil him so much. Qin Anlan glanced at her and still held little Mu Yun. Are you unhappy? No. She didn't object anymore. It was useless to object. They went all the way to Lin Xingyuan's office on the 4th floor. Lin Xingyuan had already gone to work and had been waiting for a long time. When they went in, only Lin Xingyuan and a young nurse were talking. When they came in, Lin Xingyuan asked the young nurse to leave. Qin Anlan saw half a cigarette but in the ashtray on Lin Xingyuan's desk. He pursed his lips almost imperceptibly, and then put Mu Yun on the examination table next to him. Dr. Lin, please check my son. He lowered his eyes and said, you should know his condition very well. Lin Xingyuan's eyes fell on Yi Liangqiu. After a while, he rested his eyes on little Mu Yun. From the beginning to the end, he did not look at Qin Anlan. He smiled lightly. Of course. When he was examining little Mu Yun, the little guy looked up at him with tears in his eyes and called out softly, Uncle Lin. Qin Anlan did not know how Lin Xingyuan felt at that time. He only knew that he wanted to cry. His son looked at Lin Xingyuan with an extremely trusting gaze. Lin Xingyuan had accompanied Yi Liangqiu and Mu Yun for so many years. He had even moved from the south to B City and brought her back to the south from B City. There was an indescribable feeling in his heart. After Lin Xingyuan checked, he smiled faintly. Our Mu Yun seems to be a little stronger. Qin Anlan lowered his eyes and looked at his son. Mu Yun looked more like Liangqiu. He was familiar with his facial features. And he liked them. He couldn't help but reach out to stroke his little head, but his words were directed at Lin Xingyuan. Is there no way to cure it? He didn't mind being a blood bank, but the future was long. There would be times when he would be negligent or not by Mu Yun's side. Besides, such a painful process would affect Mu Yun's future. Mu Yun couldn't go to school like this, so he still hoped that he could get better soon. He was already thinking of handing King Entertainment over to Mu Yun in the future. This child was very smart. He liked him very much. Perhaps it was a little selfish. Because he and Chichi didn't have sex, They might not have the chance to have children in this lifetime. So a ready-made heir was naturally the best. Lin Xingyuan glanced at Yi Liangqiu and then shook his head slowly. There's no way. When he grows up, this illness will naturally be cured. Chapter 1324. Qin Anlan's fingers stroked his son's soft black hair and he did not say another word. His heart ached a little. He brought little Mu Yun to have his blood drawn. Little Mu Yun stretched out his arm, which was full of needle marks. Some were new, some were from the past. His heart ached just by looking at them. Daddy, it doesn't hurt. A faint smile appeared on little Mu Yun's face. It was a beautiful smile, and it looked just like Yi Liangqiu. Qin Anlan thought of the time when Yi Liangqiu was filming a commercial film. It was a fight scene, and her back was mostly bruised. At that time, when they were living together, he asked her if it hurt. Yi Liangqiu was lying on her stomach with her face buried in the pillow, and she said that it didn't hurt. Silly girl, how could it not hurt? The corners of Qin Anlan's mouth curled up slightly, and his voice was also faint. Mu Yun, Daddy will accompany you in the future, okay? If it hurts, Daddy will hug you. The little boy's face flushed, and he shyly buried his face in his father's arms. Little Mu Yun was very distressed. Although his father did not know him in the past, he was very good to him. When he was receiving needles, his father would even hug him. But Uncle Lin was also very good to him for many years. Which one should he choose? It was difficult for him to choose, so it must be even more difficult for his mother. The two of them walked up the stairs to the 4th floor. Lin Xingyuan and Yi Liangqiu were not there. Qin Anlan asked the nurse to look after little Mu Yun, and he went outside to look for them. He could totally wait, but he could not wait. In front of the elevator, Yi Liangqiu and Lin Xingyuan stood face to face. Xingyuan, don't wait for me. She looked up at him. Lin Xingyuan's fingers touched her hair lightly, and he smiled bitterly. I can wait. Qin Anlan looked at them from afar, and could not hear what she said. He only saw their gazes, and they were looking at each other affectionately. He had a feeling that he had been cheated. She had fallen in love with someone else. He had returned the ring to her, and this morning he had seen her wearing it again. In her heart, she loved Lin Xingyuan. This discovery made him feel indescribably uncomfortable. He told himself that it was because they had a child, so he wanted her to be clean and not belong to another man. He convinced himself that this was for Mu Yun's physical and mental health. In the end, he still walked over to her and said faintly, Liangqiu, it's time to go back. His tone was very light, but his heart was burning with jealousy, as if he had caught his cheating wife. Yi Liangqiu nodded and looked at Lin Xingyuan. Xingyuan, I'll be leaving first. Lin Xingyuan didn't say anything. He just pounded his hands into his pockets and stared at them. Yi Liangqiu, it's very uncomfortable, isn't it? Qin Anlan's hand suddenly grabbed her fingers, and he stared at her unfathomably. She also stopped and looked at him sideways. After a long time, she said faintly, if you do this, I will think that you are a jealous husband. Qin Anlan, don't do such things that will make me misunderstand. There will only be misunderstandings when there is hope, right? He said ambiguously. Yi Liangqiu pursed her lips and didn't say anything. He went to carry little Mu Yun to the car, and after getting in the car and sitting down, he said, I will come to get the report in the afternoon. Yi Liangqiu didn't speak to him, and she didn't want to talk to him. Are you thinking about him? He looked at the rearview mirror as he drove, and his tone was unfriendly. Yi Liangqiu pursed her lips, and she couldn't bear it anymore. Qin Anlan, you said it yourself. Chapter 1325. In fact, he was the one who had lost control. He knew that. In this silence, he gripped the steering wheel tightly and drove. Just then, the phone on the dashboard rang. He picked it up. The voice coming from the other side was muffled. Yi Liangqiu couldn't quite understand what he was saying, however, she could see that Qin Anlan's face had turned very ugly. He even glanced at her through the rearview mirror. After that, he hung up the phone. The atmosphere in the car seemed to be frozen. Yi Liangqiu's heart also fell to the bottom. She guessed that he knew something, however, he kept acting up. When the car arrived at the hotel, he still carried Mu Yun out of the car. When he looked at Mu Yun, his eyes were still warm. Only when he looked at her could she feel the bone-piercing coldness. Yi Liangqiu thought that she and he were indeed not a good couple. No matter what she did, she couldn't enter his eyes. When they arrived at the hotel, they had lunch in the VIP area on the second floor. He carried Mu Yun back to the room and coaxed the child to sleep. Yi Liangqiu had to admit that he was very good to Mu Yun. When he returned to the master bedroom, she stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window and looked at him. Her voice was a little indifferent. "Qin Anlan, if you have anything to say, just say it. Why don't we start from the 100 million that Tang Yu gave you, huh?" Qin Anlan closed the door, took off his coat and threw it on the sofa. When he did all this, his eyes were locked on her. Yi Liangqiu pursed her lips and looked at him. After a while, she said, "That's not my intention." "Then what is?" He looked at her. "Having 2 Rh-negative blood banks. It's been 7 years, and you haven't said anything about it. But now you're telling me that you have a child. Yi Liangqiu, is this the deal between you and Tang Yu?" "Yes." She looked at him. 100 million, and I'll betray you." She looked straight at him and didn't flinch. There was a touch of blood in Qin Anlan's eyes. He walked towards her step by step and finally stood in front of her. He reached out and pinched her cheek. "Have you thought about Mu Yun? For the sake of 100 million, you let Mu Yun bear so much?" Yi Liangqiu chuckled. She laughed so hard that tears rolled down her cheeks. "Yes, I did it for money. For money, I don't even care about my own son." His face turned ashen. "Yi Liangqiu, even if you say that you did it for yourself and your son, it's still better than doing it for money." He was furious. He reached out and pulled her into his arms. His dark eyes locked onto hers. "You heartless woman." "Yes, I don't have a heart." She looked at him. "Qin Anlan, how much better are you than me?" She looked him in the eye without flinching, and he was furious enough to burn her. Finally, when his anger reached a certain level, he lost control and tore off her clothes. The sound of tearing was accompanied by her broken scream. She was thrown onto the bed forcefully. He pressed her down hard, his body was pressed against hers, and his face was pressed against hers. His eyes were so close. It was close enough to make her tremble. Suddenly, he bit her lips. She felt the pain and wanted to break free. His fingers quickly pinched her cheek, and she was forced to open her lips. He had taken her, inside and out, completely and utterly. Her clothes fell on the floor one by one, and her necklace was thrown out of the window. She screamed, struggled, cried, but she couldn't stop him. Every time she struggled, he treated her more violently. Chapter 1326. Yi Liangqiu, does it hurt? He looked at the tears at the corner of her eyes, lowered his head and kissed her, torturing her even more wantonly. "Yi Liangqiu, because I'm in so much pain, because even if I hate you for lying to me, I can't give up on Mu Yun." In this hopeless entanglement, Qin Anlan was forced to make a choice. He knew what the outcome would be, but he couldn't choose it. In the face of feelings and kinship, he would choose kinship. No matter how much love and hatred there was between him and Yi Liangqiu, Mu Yun was innocent. He couldn't give up on Mu Yun. In this long torture, she was in pain, and he was in pain. He could even feel that she had never had any other man except him. She was almost as young as the previous 2 times, because her expression looked like there was only pain and no joy. He, on the other hand, did not want her to be happy. Thus, in this game that lasted for 6 hours, he successfully made her break down in pain and made her beg in his arms. His body, which had been empty for more than 2 years, was greatly satisfied, but his heart was even emptier. He was lost. He didn't want to love her, but he fell in love with her body. When everything calmed down, he turned to the side, leaned against the headboard, took out a cigarette, lit it, and slowly took a puff. After a while, he lowered his head and looked at her. Yi Liangqiu was lying on her stomach, and her back was full of the marks he made. They were green and purple, and it was a little frightening. He knew how hard he had hit her, and he knew how crazy he was. Not only her back, but even that part of her body had been injured by him. "Can you still get up?" His voice was a little hoarse. He also despised himself in his heart. He was like a blind male dog. He had seen countless people in the past, but now he didn't want to get up. Yi Liangqiu moved slightly and sucked in a breath of air. "Hurt." He finished the cigarette in his hand and put it out. Then, he sat up and gently flipped her over, looking at her body. Even he was a little shocked by his own rudeness. He had never been so rude to a woman before. However, her messy beauty had also reached the pinnacle. He didn't even want to let her go. In the end, reason won over Yu Wang. His fingers touched her gently, and she trembled subconsciously. "Qin Anlan. Let me see if you are hurt." His voice was a little tense. Then he pressed her with one hand and checked her body firmly with the other. At this time, it was already evening, and the light was dim. He raised his hand and turned on the light. The light was bright, of her face, and she felt ashamed. "I'm fine." But he ignored her, and went over to check her body. When she opened her eyes, she saw a pair of bottomless eyes. Of his eyes. Their gazes met for a long. Yi Liangqiu was stunned. He glared at him. "Qin Anlan, do you still have any shame?" "Of course. You've already given birth to a child." He didn't hang up the phone, but looked at her with a sneer. She was so angry that she snatched the phone from him. "Also, bring a box of after-the-fact medicine." The receptionist of the hotel was stunned. This couple was really rough. Chapter 13:27. The receptionist trembled as she walked over. It was the host who opened the door. He only had a small towel around his waist. His figure was really great. His six-pack abs were evenly distributed, and it didn't make people feel like they were tangled. Instead, it was just right. The receptionist swallowed hard and handed over the ointment in her hands. "Sir, you've ordered room service." Qin Anlan looked at her. He only took the ointment but didn't take the ointment. He said coldly, "Send me 10 boxes of t-shirts." The receptionist was so scared that she peed. 10 boxes. Send them over immediately. "Oh yes, I want Tsunamoto Platinum 001, the super thin kind," he said lightly. It was as natural as talking about the weather when he said such shameful words. The receptionist secretly cursed the scumbag in her heart, but she still had a smile on her face. "Yes, Mr. Qin." Qin Anlan didn't look at her again and closed the door. The door almost hit the pretty receptionist's nose. She stood there for a long time and said angrily, "So what if you have money? If you have the guts, throw money at me." Inside the door, Qin Anlan walked into the master bedroom with the ointment. Yi Liangqiu was no longer on the bed. He heard the sound of water in the bathroom, so he walked over slowly. She was taking a bath. Qin Anlan leaned against the door and watched for a while before he walked in. He sat on the edge of the bathtub and handed the ointment to her. "Apply it yourself." Yi Liangqiu took it but didn't apply it. Instead, she splashed the water over her body. He had to admit that this was the most beautiful scene he had ever seen. She was slender and fair, and her body was well proportioned. Every inch of her was perfect. After a long time, she looked up at him. "Don't you hate me? Don't you hate me? You don't need to care about me like this." He stared at her body and said slowly, "Yi Liangqiu, I've asked the receptionist to prepare 10 boxes of t-shirts. So I advise you to apply some ointment. You're shameless." She covered her body and glared at him. However, he grabbed her hand and raised it up high. He squinted at her with his black eyes, and a hint of coldness appeared at the corner of his mouth. "Yi Liangqiu, didn't you expect such an outcome? Why did we break up in the first place? Isn't it because we can't control ourselves from sleeping with each other?" When he finished speaking, she froze. He, too, was dumbfounded. After a long time, he finally digested his own words with great difficulty. Perhaps the words spoken in anger were more instinctive. They stared at each other for a long time before he said coldly, "Yi Liangqiu, Do you think we won't have sex when we're together? I can, she said firmly. He chuckled. But I can't do it. She stood up from the water without the slightest intention of covering herself. She slowly wiped her body clean with a towel and applied some medicine. Her movements were slow, graceful, and pleasing to the eye. Qin Anlan had seen many women act coquettishly and ask for benefits after sex, or cry and say that it was their first time, but Yi Liangqiu had always been different. His gaze was a little hot as he looked at her. Qin Anlan, what do you think is the most important thing in marriage? She looked down and asked softly. He pursed his lips. Emotions. Chapter 13:28. He was speechless. Because you didn't have sex. Yi Liangqiu smiled. A marriage without sex is an incomplete marriage. Qin Anlan, how much longer are you going to lie to yourself? Yi Liangqiu, don't get involved in my life, he said unhappily. Don't think that, before he could finish, she interrupted coldly. Don't think that just because I climbed into your bed, you can be spoiled, right? She smiled coldly. Qin Anlan, you overestimate yourself. She walked into the bedroom slowly and he actually followed her. Yi Liangqiu took out a box of pills from the bedside table. It was the morning after pill. She swallowed one, drank some water and ate it. She didn't force herself during the whole process. Qin Anlan's heart tightened. You don't want to give birth to my child just like that. I'm scared, Qin Anlan. Her voice was a little tired. You're not the only victim. She was pregnant with his child for 4 months and had to endure the pain while filming. She had to finish filming before she could safely give birth to the child. She knew that if she didn't leave behind a few works, it would be impossible for her to make a comeback in the future. King Entertainment wouldn't value her. He had no idea how much she had sacrificed for her success and how much pain she had to go through. Perhaps he did like her, but it was very, very shallow, and his love was very selfish. He dominated everything and didn't allow her to have her own thoughts. When he was happy, she was his little Liangqiu, his pillow and sleeping pill. When he was done with her, he wouldn't be so happy. He could tell her to leave and say that they could never be together. After all these years, when had she ever had such extravagant hopes? Not even once. She looked at him with a strange gaze. Qin Anlan suddenly said, "Why did you come back to me if you liked him?" "Because I didn't have a choice." She threw him a document. "Qin Anlan, go ask your mother what she did to me. Go ask her why she had a heart attack a year ago. Go ask her if she already knew about Mu Yun's existence." Qin Anlan was stunned. He couldn't believe it. His mother knew of Mu Yun's existence. Why didn't she tell me? His voice was tense. Yi Liangqiu looked into his eyes and smiled faintly. Her voice was also faint. Because Mu Yun is a sick child. It's not worth her telling you. Is that why you told her that I got married in New York? He closed his eyes. She did not answer directly but said something else. Qin Anlan, when your mother was hospitalized, Mu Yun was also hospitalized. The reason was that your mother took Mu Yun away by force, causing Mu Yun to be injured. Qin Anlan looked at her for a long time before saying bitterly, "You hate me, don't you?" "A little bit," she said bluntly and looked into his eyes. "Qin Anlan, we're even." He looked at the unfamiliarity in her eyes. Looking at those emotionless eyes, he suddenly missed her in the past. He missed her soft appearance in his condominium. At this moment, Qin Anlan realized that the old Yi Liangqiu was gone. He had driven her away himself. His voice was almost trembling. "Do you love him?" "I like him," she answered him seriously. She answered him very seriously. There were some words that she had never said to Lin Xingyuan before. "If you didn't appear, I think I would have married him and lived my life peacefully." Chapter 13:29. She stood at such a high position. Was she willing to give up everything? Back then, he had only put her on the shelf to dampen her spirit. He had never thought that she would give up. She was a natural superstar, and she should stand in the most dazzling place. Yi Liangqiu's gaze became a little fanatical. He didn't understand her, but she knew him very well. She smiled and said, "Qin Anlan, do you think that's important to me?" "I think that's where you should stand," he said calmly. She had no idea how dazzling she was on the big screen. He had watched countless of her films, and he had a collection of them, as well as every single one of her endorsements. Yi Liangqiu raised her head and tears flowed down her cheeks. She tilted her head and looked at him. "What do I want fame and fortune for? That's never what I want." She almost growled out the last sentence. He was stunned. She wiped her tears and said, "You won't understand." To her, the entertainment industry was just for survival. When there was no pressure to survive, she didn't want to be in such a colorful industry, because the more prosperous it was, the lonelier she would be. She didn't love Lin Xingyuan, but she liked him. She felt that she would be happy with him. "Qin Anlan, you don't need to be on guard against me. You don't need to worry that I will interfere with your relationship, because I'm not interested." She smiled bitterly. "If your heart dies, you won't be able to live." Her love had been destroyed that year. He had made her take morning after pills, and he had asked her to leave. He didn't want her. Qin Anlan stared fixedly at her. At this moment, the doorbell rang. He looked at her and went to open the door. It was the receptionist who had brought the morning after pills. "Mr. Qin, the Compendium Platinum 001 is 10 boxes. The receptionist smiled, but she was thinking, "Use it. I won't kill you." Qin Anlan reached out and took it, then closed the door expressionlessly. The receptionist's nose was almost smashed again. Her face darkened. "So what if you're rich?" Qin Anlan took the 10 boxes and threw them on the bedside table. Yi Liangqiu, on the other hand, pretended that she didn't see anything. Qin Anlan stood in front of the French window and smoked for a long time before he said softly, "Yi Liangqiu, have you ever liked me?" She looked at his back and smiled. "I don't like it anymore." "You're lying." He slowly turned his head and looked at her. "If you don't like it, why did you still sleep with me?" "Can't I have other motives?" she asked. And he didn't say a word. Yi Liangqiu slowly lay down on the bed and said, "Qin Anlan, I'm just an ordinary person. Just treat it as a physiological need, just treat it as a play." She said it casually, but he was burning with anger. "Playing along? If it weren't for me, would you have found someone else if you had a physical need?" After he said that, he took a long drag on his cigarette. Yi Liangqiu chuckled. "Probably. I would." His body froze. "Yi Liangqiu, how dare you? Qin Anlan, if I get married one day, do you think I'll be like you, in an immoral marriage? Do you think that kind of marriage is normal?" She said mockingly, deliberately provoking him and rubbing salt in his wound. Qin Anlan narrowed his eyes, but he really didn't seem to be able to do anything to her. Just then, his phone rang. Chapter 1330. Yi Liangqiu's gaze fell on his face. After a long while, she smiled. Qin Anlan felt a stab of pain in his heart. He felt that her gaze was mocking him. However, he didn't have time. After taking a look at her, he started to put on his clothes. Yi Liangqiu was a little tired. She lay flat and closed her eyes. She didn't look at him the whole time. When Qin Anlan left, his gaze was a little complicated. He looked at her as if she was asleep. But in the end, he still left. Before he left, he went to see Mu Yun. He ruffled his hair and asked him to take care of his mother. Mu Yun sat on the sofa. "What's wrong with Mommy?" Qin Anlan paused for a moment. "Mommy is a little tired." Little Mu Yun jumped off the sofa and walked to the door of the master bedroom. He saw the mess in the room. He was a precocious child. He knew that Mommy had been bullied by Daddy. He raised his head and looked at Qin Anlan. His expression was a little uneasy. "Will Daddy come back?" Qin Anlan's heart softened. This child was truly very sensible, and also very sensitive. He squatted down and hugged Mu Yun. He said patiently, "He will definitely come back. Daddy will come back tonight." Little Mu Yun's little arms wrapped around his neck and hugged him tightly. His slightly cold face was pressed against Qin Anlan's face. He said softly, "Will Daddy not want Mommy anymore?" Qin Anlan's body trembled. He raised his son's little face and looked at him seriously. A 7-year-old child knew far more than they could imagine. He had struggled with it before. At this moment, when little Mu Yun asked him this question, he already had an answer in his heart. So he rubbed the little boy's little head. Of course not. The little person in his arms hugged him even tighter. Later, he even kissed him on the face. After the kiss, little Mu Yun's face was slightly red. He refused to let Qin Anlan see it. He hugged him and said shyly, "Daddy, I've only kissed you." The underlying meaning was that he hadn't even kissed Uncle Lin before. Qin Anlan's heart was instantly filled with sweetness and indescribable comfort. This little girl was as awkward as Yi Liangqiu, but she was quite cute. At this moment, he didn't even want to go to Bee City anymore. He might as well just stay. To help others, to help oneself. However, he was always worried about Chichi. She had no money with her. Would something happen to her? Reaching out, he plucked the little guy from his arms and patted him. "Daddy will be back soon." Little Mu Yun nodded lightly, with tears in his eyes. His little appearance melted Qin Anlan's heart. Yi Liangqiu doesn't know how to act coquettishly, but Yi Muyun's ability to do so explosively makes him able to grab Qin Anlan at any time. He patted his son's head again before leaving. The door closed. Yi Muyun then walked into the bedroom. The little boy carefully picked up his mother's clothes one by one and folded them, although they were a little tattered. Sigh, he was so sensible. He felt worried for the adults. Yi Liangqiu was not asleep. Her voice was very soft. "Mu Yun, has he left?" Little Mu Yun climbed onto the bed and lay beside his mother, hugging her with his little hands. That soft little hand made people feel very comfortable. There was a kind of warm feeling. The little boy raised his head. "Daddy." Yi Liangqiu sometimes had a headache with this son. He was so precocious that he didn't seem like a 7-year-old child. He was intelligent enough to communicate with adults. Although she was unwilling, she still nodded. "You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.